Hey, what is going on, guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video, I'm going to be giving you guys my opinion on the best top laners for patch 6.6. So first up is going to be Trundle. Right now, with a lot of the tanks being played in the top lane, we're seeing a lot of Malphite, Nautilus, Rammus. It makes Trundle a pretty strong pick, just due to the fact that his ultimate does steal the enemy's resist whenever he uses it. So he's just going to be really tanky in mid to late game team fights if he can get that right matchup where he is going up against a tanky top laner. He's a pretty good laner as well. He really doesn't have too many hard lane matchups right now, especially with a lot of the tanky melee picks being played in the top lane. He has a pretty good mid to late game. You really only need to build 1 or 2 damage items on Trundle, and then you can go full tank after that. You can still deal a lot of damage in team fights, and you'll be able to soak a ton as well. He is also a pretty good split pushing champion because he does have his W, which increases his attack speed. He's really good at setting up ganks because of his pillar. His pillar is kind of OP in my opinion. It's such a strong ability if you can place it correctly because it'll knock the enemies back and it'll also slow them for a really long duration. So his E is just really good for setting up ganks in the early game and also for team fighting. And he does have pretty good sustain in the laning phase too because of his passive. A few cons to Trundle though are that he can get kited pretty easily since he does not have a gap closer, and he doesn't have really any strong engage unless he can pick someone out with his E. Other than that though, he doesn't have something like a Malphite ultimate, or he doesn't have a gap closer which he can use to engage on the back line. Next up is Malphite. So Malphite is one of the strongest engaged top laners in the game due to his ultimate. His ultimate is just an overall really strong ability if you can use it correctly in a team fight. It can be so game changing if you can get it off on a few targets or in the enemy squishies, because just one Malphite ultimate in the mid to late game could end up snowballing the game out of control. He's also great against AD enemy comps. We're still seeing quite a few assassins or AD assassins being played in the mid lane right now, so that makes Malphite a pretty strong pick. The more armor that you build on him, the more damage you're going to do because your W and your E both scale off of armor. He also does have pretty strong crowd control with his Q and his ultimate, and like I said, his pick potential is some of the best, if not the best, for any champion in the game. And a few cons to Mal are that he's a pretty easy gank target in the early game since he does not have a gap closer, and he also does have pretty high mana cost, so I would recommend going Corrupting Potion on Malphite so you can sustain the mana and the HP in the early game. Next up is going to be Nautilus. So Nautilus is a very strong bruiser tank champion. He's got so much crowd control in his kit with his ultimate, his E, his Q, and his passive. So he's really good at setting up ganks in the early game. If the enemy or if your jungler does come to gank for you, then you can set up ganks really easily. And his team fight potential is also really strong just due to the fact that he does have great crowd control. He's one of the better laning top laners in the game too. He really doesn't take too much skill to play. When you're playing as Nautilus in the laning phase, what you want to do is just try to poke the enemies out with their E when they do go in for CS, and then when your W is off cooldown, then you can look for trades really easily and you can win them most of the time because you are going to be getting that shield with your W, and you're also going to deal extra damage for the duration your shield is up. So overall, Nautilus can trade really nicely in the laning phase. He does have great pick potential too with his Q and his ultimate, so whenever you get ahead as Nautilus, always look for those picks with your Q. He's got pretty strong peel as well in his kit because he's got his E and he's also got his passive, so if the enemies do try to jump on your back line, then you can peel for your AD carry really nicely. And one con to Naut though is that, like Malphite, he's a relatively easy gank target in the early game since he does not have a gap closer. Next up, I have Poppy. So right now, Poppy is still my personal favorite top lane champion. I really like that you only need to build 1 or 2 offensive items on Poppy, and then after that you can go full tank and still deal a ton of damage in team fights. You can chunk the enemy squishies down to below half HP with your full combo by only having an Iceborne Gauntlet and then full tank after that, so I really like that Poppy is one of the stronger bruiser champions in the game right now. She's got really high base damage on on all of her abilities, so this is another reason why you shouldn't have to really build more than the Iceborne Gauntlet on her to deal a lot of damage. She's got great disengage in her kit too with your ultimate. Her ultimate is a really strong ability if you can use it correctly, because let's say the enemy tank engages on your back line. If you can knock him away with your ultimate, then that could really change the momentum of the fight really quickly, and you could just end up winning the fight for your team with a good ultimate. She's got the movement speed and the resist with her W, which allows her to engage nicely and stay pretty tanky as well, and in my opinion she is a pretty easy to play top lane champion too. And one con to Poppy is that she does not have an escape, so you have to be careful in the laning phase that you are not pushing out too far. And to round out my top 5 for this patch, I have Rammus. So right now Rammus is a pretty strong pick in the top lane, just because we're not seeing a lot of top lane champions that can really bully him out in the laning phase. We're either seeing heavy tank champions being played in the top lane right now, like Nautilus and Malphite, or we're seeing AD champions being played. So Rammus does really well in both of those matchups, since he can farm really easily in the laning phase, and then if the enemy team does have a heavy AD composition, let's say they have a Zed mid and they have a Shyvana jungle and an Aurelia top lane, then Rammus can rush a Thornmail and he can build full tank and full armor after that, and he's going to be really hard to deal with in mid to late game team fights. The more armor you build on Rammus, the more damage you're going to do with your passive, so if the enemy team does lock a few AD champions, then definitely look to pick Rammus for either the top lane or for the jungle. He's got great crowd control in his kit with his Q and with his taunt. He's just so hard to deal with in team fights. Like, if the enemy team has someone like a Kha'Zix or a Rengar, or someone who wants to jump on the back line, Rammus's taunt is just so strong against those champions, because it's a point and click ability, and if he just uses that when the enemy team does try to jump in on his backline, then he's gonna be a very successful pick, and it's just so easy to peel for your carries with Rammus. He's got pretty good mobility as well with his Q, and he is one of the easier top lane picks as well in my opinion. A few cons to Rammus though are that he is weaker if the enemy team does have more of an AP composition. If they only have one AD champion being their AD carry, then I wouldn't pick Rammus in that situation, and he is also pretty weak if he does fall behind, because he's a champion that wants to get in the enemy's face, he wants to get in the back line, and if he doesn't have the tank stats to do that, he's just gonna get bursted out really quickly. First up on the honorable mentions, I have Kayle. So right now Kayle is one of the stronger AP top lane champions. There really isn't a lot of AP champions being played right now in the top lane, so if your team is lacking AP and you are playing top lane, then I would definitely recommend picking Kayle. Next up I have Graves. So Graves is one of the stronger laning top lane champions in the game. He does snowball really hard, so when you are playing him, make sure you do take advantage of your stronger early game. If you are going up against a melee pick in the top lane, then just look to poke them out and look to zone them from CS, because he is definitely one of the stronger laning top laners. Next up is Nasus. So Nasus is surprisingly good right now, just because we're not seeing a lot of champions being played that do well against Nasus. We're seeing a lot of tanks being played in the top lane right now, so if the enemy team locks someone like a Nautilus or a Malphite, then that's a good time to pick Nasus, since those champions can't really bully Nasus out in the laning phase. Nasus can farm up pretty nicely against those champions, so if the enemy team does lock a tank, or if they lock a champion who isn't going to bully Nasus out in the laning phase, then definitely look to pick him this patch. Next up I have Sion. So Sion is also a great CC tank top lane champion. If you don't feel like playing Nautilus or Malphite, if you're getting bored of those champions, then Sion is definitely another good choice if you are looking to fit the role of a tanky top laner. Next up I have Wukong. So Wukong is a really good teamfight bruiser top lane champion. If your team already has good tank for support and for jungle, then picking Wukong in that situation would be a pretty good idea. If your team is lacking tank though, let's say you don't have a tanky support and jungle, then in that situation I think it would be better to pick someone like a Rammus or a Naut or a Malphite, but if your team does lack damage, then picking Wukong would be a pretty good idea. And to round out the honorable mentions for this patch, I have Quinn. Quinn, so even though Quinn did get a nerf to her Q, I still think that she is a pretty good pick for solo queue just because she does have good snowball potential and good roaming potential. If she does get ahead in the laning phase, then she can look for roams with her ultimate and she can help her lanes out. So just the fact that Quinn does have good roaming potential and she still does have pretty good kill potential in the laning phase, I still think that she is a solid pick. So that is going to be all for this video, guys. If you did enjoy, then be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you have not already. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you have a great day and I will see you in my next video.